Christmas night. The street glowed with lights and the hum of passing crowds. Brian Blake walked with his son Leo through the cold air, their breath visible in short clouds. They passed a woman sitting against a brick wall, hunched over, her coat thin and torn. Brian kept moving, but Leo stopped. He pulled his father's hand and turned back, his voice cut through the noise. "Dad, that's Mom." Brian froze. He looked at the woman, hollow cheeks, dirty clothes. It was Donna, his ex-wife, the woman who left them 5 years ago for someone richer. Brian had built a life that worked. It was simple, predictable. He drove Leo to school every morning, worked his shift at the print shop, picked Leo up in the afternoon, made dinner, helped with homework, and put him to bed by 9. Weekends were for errands and the park. The routine kept them steady. It kept the past where it belonged. Donna had left when Leo was 3. She didn't take much. A suitcase, her jewelry, a framed photo of herself. She told Brian she deserved more than a cramped apartment and a husband who smelled like ink. She said a man named Richard had shown her what real wealth looked like. Brian remembered standing in the doorway holding Leo while she walked to a car he didn't recognize. She didn't look back. Not once. For a long time after that, Brian moved through the days like a man underwater. He fed Leo. He went to work. He paid the bills. But he didn't feel much of anything. The anger came later. Then the exhaustion. Then, eventually, a kind of quiet acceptance. He stopped checking her social media. He stopped wondering if she was happy. He told himself he had moved on. And for the most part, he believed it. Leo didn't talk about his mother often, but Brian knew the boy remembered her. Sometimes Leo would ask questions. Where did she go? Why didn't she call? Brian never lied. He told Leo that his mother had made a choice, and that choice didn't include them. He said it calmly, without bitterness, because he didn't want Leo to grow up hating anyone. But he also didn't pretend it didn't hurt. Tonight was supposed to be easy. They had walked downtown to see the Christmas lights. The city strung them across every lamppost and storefront, and Leo liked the way they blinked in patterns. Brian bought him hot chocolate from a cart on the corner, and they sipped it while wandering through the crowds. Leo wore the scarf Brian's mother had knitted for him last winter. His cheeks were red from the cold. He looked happy. They were heading back toward the car when they passed the woman on the sidewalk. Brian barely glanced at her. There were always people sitting along this stretch of road, especially during the holidays. He had learned not to make eye contact. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. If you stopped for everyone, you'd never make it home. But Leo stopped. Brian felt the tug on his hand and turned around. Leo was staring at the woman. His face had gone pale. Brian followed his gaze. The woman sat with her back against the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her coat was too thin for the weather. Her hair hung in greasy strands around her face. Her hands were chapped and red. Leo's voice was small but certain. He said it again. "Dad, that's Mom." Brian's chest constricted. He looked at the woman more closely. The shape of her face, the slope of her nose, the way her eyes turned down at the corners. It was her. It was Donna. He felt the ground shift beneath him. His pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to turn away. He wanted to grab Leo and keep walking. Pretend they hadn't seen her. Pretend this wasn't happening. But Leo was already moving toward her. Brian's hand shot out and caught his son's shoulder. Leo looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. Brian's mouth was dry. The words wouldn't come. All the carefully constructed walls he had built over the past 5 years were crumbling in real time. Donna lifted her head. She saw them. Her expression shifted from blank exhaustion to something like horror. She opened her mouth, but didn't speak. Her eyes moved from Brian to Leo and back again. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the brick behind her. Brian's mind raced. This couldn't be real. The woman who had left them for a life of luxury was sitting on a frozen sidewalk, begging for change. It didn't make sense. He tried to reconcile the image in front of him with the woman who had walked out of their apartment 5 years ago in a designer coat and heels. They didn't match. They couldn't be the same person. Leo pulled against Brian's grip. His voice cracked. "Dad, we have to help her." Brian felt something inside him snap. Not anger, not pity. Something colder. He looked down at his son and saw the tears forming in his eyes. Leo still loved her, despite everything, despite the years of silence and abandonment. He still loved his mother. Brian's throat went tight. He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to open this door. But Leo was looking at him with a desperation that broke something fundamental in his chest. Brian let go of his son's shoulder. He took a breath. Then he walked toward Donna. She flinched when he approached. She tried to say something, but the words tangled in her throat. Brian stopped a few feet away. He looked down at her. She looked so small, so broken. The emotions he expected didn't come. No rage, no satisfaction. Just a dull, heavy sadness. Leo stepped forward and knelt beside her. His voice was soft. "Mom?" Donna's face crumpled. She reached out like she wanted to touch him but stopped herself. Her hand hovered in the air between them. Brian watched the scene unfold and felt like he was standing outside his own body. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be over this. He was supposed to be immune. But he wasn't. And now he had to decide what came next. He looked at Leo, then at Donna, then back at the street behind them, where the lights still blinked in cheerful patterns, and people walked by without noticing the small tragedy unfolding on the sidewalk. Brian exhaled slowly. He made a choice. Whether it was right remained unclear, but it was the only one he could make in that moment. He bent down and spoke quietly. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. We're going there. You're coming with us." Donna stared at him like she didn't believe what she was hearing. Brian didn't repeat himself. He stood up, took Leo's hand, and started walking. After a moment, he heard the scrape of her shoes against the pavement as she got to her feet and followed. The coffee shop was warm and too bright. Brian pushed the door open and held it while Leo walked in, followed by Donna. She moved like someone who didn't belong indoors anymore. Her shoulders hunched forward. Her eyes darted around the room, as if checking for exits. A couple at a corner table glanced up, then quickly looked away. Brian led them to a booth near the back. Leo slid in first, and Donna hesitated before sitting across from him. Brian took the seat beside his son. The vinyl cushion cracked under his weight. A waitress appeared almost immediately, her smile automatic and professional. She set down 3 menus without acknowledging the tension at the table. Donna stared down at the menu like it was written in a language she didn't understand. Her hands rested on the table, palms down. The skin was rough and cracked. Her nails were broken. Brian noticed a scar on her left wrist that hadn't been there before. He forced himself to look away. Leo reached across the table and touched her hand. Donna flinched, then stilled. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Leo's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you okay?" Donna nodded, but the movement was stiff and unconvincing. She pulled her hand back and folded it into her lap. Brian watched the exchange and felt something twist inside him. Anger, or grief, or something worse, he couldn't tell. The urge to comfort her battled with the urge to walk out. The waitress returned with a notepad. She looked at Brian expectantly. He glanced at Donna, then back at the menu. A memory surfaced unbidden. The way she used to order coffee. Black with 2 sugars. She always said cream ruined the taste. He wondered why that detail came back to him now, of all times. Brian spoke without looking at Donna. She'll have a black coffee with 2 sugars, and a turkey sandwich. He turned to Leo. Hot chocolate for you? Leo nodded. Brian ordered the same for himself. The waitress wrote it down and left. Donna stared at Brian like he had just done something incomprehensible. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Brian didn't acknowledge it. He kept his eyes on the table. The silence stretched between them. Leo picked at the corner of his napkin, tearing small pieces off and arranging them in a line. Donna sat frozen, her hand still hidden in her lap. Brian's jaw tightened. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to do this. But Leo was watching him with the kind of hope that made it impossible to leave. Brian cleared his throat. His voice came out harder than he intended. How long have you been out there? Donna's shoulders stiffened. She didn't look at him. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much lately. A while. Brian waited for more, but she didn't offer it. His frustration flared. That's not an answer. Donna finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. 6 months, maybe 7, I don't know anymore. Leo's hand stilled on the napkin. He looked at his mother with a kind of devastation that made Brian's chest ache. The boy's voice cracked. Where were you before that? Donna's face twisted. She looked like she wanted to run. Brian felt a grim satisfaction at her discomfort, then immediately hated himself for it. Donna's voice dropped to barely audible. Different places, shelters, friends' couches, until there were no more friends. The waitress returned with their drinks. She set them down carefully and left without a word. The steam rose from the coffee cups in thin, curling lines. Donna wrapped both hands around her cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. She didn't drink. Brian leaned back against the booth. He crossed his arms. His voice was flat. What happened to Richard? Donna flinched at the name. She stared into her coffee. For a long moment, Brian thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, and her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear. He wasn't rich. He was a con artist. He took everything I had and left. Brian felt the words land like stones. The revelation caught him off guard. He looked at her more closely. The woman sitting across from him bore almost no resemblance to the one who had walked out 5 years ago. That woman had been polished and confident. This woman looked like she had been scraped hollow. Leo's voice broke the silence. Did he hurt you? Donna's eyes snapped to her son. Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe. Or shame. She shook her head quickly. No, not like that. Brian didn't believe her, but he didn't push. He didn't want to know. He didn't want to feel the sympathy that was already creeping into the edges of his anger. He wanted to stay cold. He wanted to stay distant. But sitting here, watching her hands shake around the coffee cup, he felt the old wounds reopening. He had loved her once, deeply, stupidly. He had thought they would build a life together. He had thought she was happy. And then one day, she told him she wasn't, and she left. He had spent 5 years convincing himself he didn't care anymore, but he did care. He hated that he cared. He hated that seeing her like this made him feel anything other than vindication. Because this should have been satisfying. This should have been proof that he was right and she was wrong. But it didn't feel like that. It just felt sad. The waitress brought the food. The turkey sandwich sat untouched in front of Donna. Leo picked at his hot chocolate. Brian drank his coffee in silence. The minutes stretched. Finally, Brian set his cup down and spoke. His voice was quieter now, less sharp. Why didn't you call? Donna looked up. Her face was pale. I was ashamed. Brian's jaw tightened. Of what? Donna's voice cracked. Of everything. Of leaving. Of being wrong. Of ending up like this. She gestured vaguely at herself, at the torn coat and the dirt under her nails. I thought you'd be better off without me. Both of you." Leo's voice was small. "We weren't." Donna's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with one hand. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't make a sound. Brian watched her and felt the last of his defenses collapse. He didn't want to feel this. He didn't want to forgive her. But sitting here, watching her break apart in front of their son, he realized something he had been avoiding for years. He had already forgiven her. He just hadn't admitted it to himself. The anger he had carried for so long wasn't about her anymore. It was about the life he thought he deserved and didn't get. It was about the fear that he wasn't enough, that he would never be enough. And that fear had nothing to do with Donna. It was his own. Brian exhaled slowly. He looked at Leo, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. Then he looked at Donna, who was still trying to hold herself together. The right course of action eluded him, but he knew he couldn't let Leo grow up thinking his father was the kind of man who turned his back on people when they were down. Brian's voice was steady. "Eat the sandwich." Donna looked at him in confusion. Brian nodded toward the plate. "You need to eat." Donna stared at the sandwich like she didn't know what to do with it. Slowly, she picked it up. Her hands shook. She took a small bite, chewed mechanically, and swallowed. Brian watched her and felt a strange kind of relief. At least she was eating. At least that was something. Leo's voice was tentative. "Can she come home with us?" Brian's heart stopped. He looked at his son and saw the desperation in his face. Leo wanted his mother back. Of course he did. Brian had tried to fill the gap she left, but he couldn't be both parents. He couldn't give Leo everything. And Leo knew it. His throat went dry. He looked at Donna, who had gone very still. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Fear, maybe. Or hope. Or both. Brian's mind raced. He thought about the apartment, the 2 bedrooms, the fragile routine they had built, the years of stability that could unravel in an instant. He thought about Leo's face when he saw his mother on the street, the way he had stopped and turned back without hesitation, the way he had said her name like it was the most important word in the world. Brian understood what the answer should be, what a good father would do, but he also understood what it would cost him. Opening the door to Donna meant opening the door to everything he had tried to leave behind. The hurt, the disappointment, the fear that she would leave again and break Leo's heart all over. The question of whether he could survive that remained unanswered, whether Leo could either. Brian's voice was quiet. "I don't know." Leo's face fell. Donna looked down at her hands. The silence returned, heavier this time. Brian felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He wanted to say something. He wanted to fix this. But the words wouldn't come. The waitress came by and refilled his coffee without asking. Brian stared into the cup and tried to think. He tried to imagine what life would look like if he said yes, if he brought Donna home, if he let her back into their lives. He tried to imagine the conversations, the awkward dinners, the sleepless nights wondering if she would still be there in the morning. And then he tried to imagine what life would look like if he said no, if he left her on the street and went home with Leo and pretended this never happened. He tried to imagine Leo's face, the questions he would ask, the resentment that would grow over time. The moment, years from now, when Leo would look at him and see someone who chose pride over compassion. Brian closed his eyes. The path forward remained unclear. All he knew was that sitting in this coffee shop, with his ex-wife across from him and his son beside him, he felt more lost than he had in years. He opened his eyes and looked at Donna. She was watching him with the kind of vulnerability that made him ache. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to stay angry. But all he felt was tired. Brian reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around his wallet. He pulled it out and opened it slowly. Inside was a checkbook he rarely used. He pulled it free and set it on the table. Donna's eyes widened. She shook her head. No, I can't. Brian ignored her. He clicked his pen and started writing. His handwriting was steady. He filled in the amount. $500. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get her off the street for a while. Enough to buy her time to figure out what came next. He tore the check from the book and slid it across the table. Donna stared at it like it might disappear. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why? Brian didn't answer right away. He looked at Leo, who was watching him with something close to awe. Then he looked back at Donna. His voice was calm. Because I don't want my son to think his father is the kind of man who leaves people behind. Donna picked up the check with trembling fingers. She held it like it might burn her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Brian watched her struggle and felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense that he had done what he could. Leo was staring at him with eyes that held too many questions. Brian could see the hope there, the belief that this moment meant something bigger, that his father had just opened a door that would lead them all back to being a family. Brian wanted to tell him it wasn't that simple, that money didn't fix broken things. But the words wouldn't come, and he didn't want to crush whatever fragile hope was keeping his son together. Donna's voice finally came, rough and uneven. I don't know what to say. Brian's response was immediate and flat. Then don't say anything. She looked up at him, searching his face for something he couldn't give her. An invitation, maybe. A sign that this was more than charity. But Brian kept his expression neutral. He wasn't ready to offer more. Perhaps he never would be. Leo's voice cut through the tension. Will we see you again? The question hung in the air. Donna's eyes moved to her son, and Brian saw the war happening behind them. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise. But she was smart enough to know that promises from her didn't mean much anymore. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked to Brian, as if asking permission. Brian's jaw tightened. He didn't want to make this decision. He didn't want to be the gatekeeper between his son and his mother. But he also couldn't pretend this was simple. Couldn't pretend that letting Donna back into their lives wouldn't come with consequences. He looked at Leo and saw the desperation written across his face. Then he looked at Donna and saw the same thing mirrored back. Brian's voice was measured. That depends on what you do with this. He nodded toward the check in her hand. If you use it to get back on your feet, then maybe. If you waste it, then no. Donna's face crumpled slightly. She nodded, her movements jerky and uncertain. I'll use it right. I promise. Brian didn't respond. Promises from her felt hollow. But he also knew that saying so out loud would hurt Leo more than it would hurt her. So he kept quiet and let the moment settle. The waitress returned with the bill. Brian paid in cash, leaving a tip that was probably too generous. He stood up and put his wallet back in his jacket. Leo slid out of the booth and looked between his parents with an expression that broke Brian's heart. The boy seemed lost, uncertain whether this was goodbye or something else. Brian put a hand on Leo's shoulder. Go wait by the door. Leo hesitated, then nodded. He walked toward the front of the shop, glancing back once before stopping near the entrance. Brian watched him go, then turned to Donna. She was still sitting, the check clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Brian's voice dropped lower. I meant what I said. If you hurt him again, we're done. No second chances. No explanations. You'll be dead to us. Donna's eyes filled with tears. She nodded quickly. I understand. Brian studied her face. He wanted to believe she meant it. He wanted to believe this was rock bottom and the only direction left was up. But he had learned a long time ago that people didn't change just because you wanted them to. They changed because they chose to. And whether Donna had that choice in her anymore remained uncertain. He turned and walked toward the door without another word. Leo was waiting, his face pale and drawn. Brian took his hand, and they stepped out into the cold night air. The street was quieter now. Most of the crowds had dispersed. The Christmas lights still blinked in their relentless patterns, indifferent to the small human drama that had just unfolded inside the coffee shop. Leo's voice was small. "Are we just leaving her?" Brian's chest constricted. He stopped walking and crouched down so he was eye level with his son. Leo's eyes were red, on the verge of tears. Brian reached up and brushed a strand of hair off the boy's forehead. His voice was gentle. "I gave her what I could. The rest is up to her." Leo's face twisted. But what if she needs more? Brian's heart ached. He wanted to tell his son that sometimes people needed more than you could give. That sometimes love wasn't enough. That sometimes you had to protect yourself and the people you were responsible for, even if it meant letting someone else fall. But Leo was 8 years old. He didn't need those lessons yet. Brian's voice was soft. "Then she'll have to find it somewhere else. We can't save her, Leo. She has to save herself." Leo's tears spilled over. He wiped them away with the back of his hand, his breath hitching. Brian pulled him into a hug, holding him tight while the boy cried into his shoulder. He felt the weight of every decision he had made that night, pressing down on him. Whether he had done the right thing remained unclear. Whether there even was a right thing. After a moment, Leo pulled back. His face was blotchy and wet, but he nodded. Brian stood up and took his hand again. They walked toward the car in silence. The cold air bit at their faces. Brian's mind churned with thoughts he couldn't organize. He kept seeing Donna's face, the way she had looked at the check, the way she had looked at Leo. When they reached the car, Brian unlocked it and opened the passenger door for Leo. The boy climbed in without a word. Brian closed the door and stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the cold metal. He looked back toward the coffee shop. Through the large front window, he could see Donna still sitting in the booth. She hadn't moved. The check was still in her hand. Something in Brian's chest pulled tight. He wanted to go back. He wanted to do more. But he also understood that doing more wouldn't fix this. It would just delay the inevitable. Donna had to decide who she wanted to be, and until she did, there was nothing he could do. He got in the car and started the engine. The heat kicked on, blowing cold air that slowly warmed. Leo was staring out the window, his face turned away. Brian pulled out of the parking spot and drove in silence. The streets were mostly empty now. The lights blurred past them in streaks of red and green and gold. Halfway home, Leo spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Brian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to lie. He wanted to tell his son that everything would be fine, that Donna would cash the check and find a place to stay and get her life together, and maybe, someday, they could all be a family again. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't give Leo false hope. Brian's voice was honest. "I don't know." Leo nodded. He didn't ask anything else. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. When they pulled into the apartment complex, Brian turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. Leo unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't move to get out. Brian looked over at him. The boy's face was pale and tired. He looked older than he had that morning. Brian reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You okay?" Leo nodded, but his voice was uncertain. "I think so." Brian's heart broke a little. He wanted to take this weight off his son's shoulders. He wanted to go back in time and make different choices. But he couldn't. All he could do was move forward and hope that the choices he had made tonight wouldn't haunt them both. They got out of the car and walked up to the apartment. Brian unlocked the door and let Leo in first. The apartment was warm and familiar. The Christmas tree they had decorated last week still stood in the corner, its lights blinking softly. It felt like a lifetime ago. Leo took off his coat and hung it on the hook by the door. He stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then he turned to Brian. His voice was quiet. "Thank you for helping her." Something in Brian's throat went tight. He nodded. "Go get ready for bed." Leo walked down the hall to his room. Brian watched him go, then closed the door and locked it. He stood there in the silence, feeling the weight of the night settle over him. He thought about Donna sitting in that coffee shop. He thought about the check in her hand. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong. But he also thought about Leo's face when he said thank you. And he realized that maybe he hadn't done this for Donna at all. Maybe he had done it for his son. So that Leo could grow up knowing his father was the kind of man who helped people, even when they didn't deserve it. Even when it hurt. Brian walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The Christmas lights were still blinking. The world was still turning. And somewhere out there, Donna was making a choice. Brian couldn't predict what that choice would be, but he knew he had given her the chance to make it. He closed the curtains and turned away. Tomorrow would come, and they would deal with whatever it brought. But tonight, he had done what he could, and that would have to be enough. Inside the coffee shop, Donna sat alone in the booth. The check was still in her hand. She stared down at it, reading the amount over and over. $500. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than she had seen in months, more than she thought she deserved. She looked up at the window and saw Brian's car pull away. She watched until the taillights disappeared into the night. Then she looked back down at the check. Her hands were shaking. Tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the table. She didn't wipe them away. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen a person instead of a mistake. Someone had given her a chance without asking for anything in return. And that simple act of kindness broke something open inside her that she thought had died a long time ago. Donna folded the check carefully and put it in her pocket. She stood up and walked out of the coffee shop into the cold night. The street was empty. The lights were still blinking, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt like maybe she could find her way back.